Look, I don't think the American public wants to see our U.S. military kicking in doors and separating families.
Democratic Senator-elect Ruben Gallego draws a hard line in the sand with Donald Trump. Our one-on-one interview with him. The incoming administration campaigned on dismantling the Department of Education, what that could mean for your children. The results of the 2024 election still need to be certified, but politicians on both sides of the aisle are threatening to challenge Governor Katie Hobbs in 2026. Our panel breaks it all down now on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged. Senator-elect Ruben Gallego is preparing to move from the House to the Senate, where Democrats will soon be in the minority. I spoke with him this week about his election win and how he views his role in the Senate. And thank you very much, Senator-elect Ruben Gallego. I know you're very busy here, so we do appreciate you taking some time to stop by here and chat with us. And I do want, yeah, and I know a lot has happened since a ton of political news has happened since you were declared the winner in your Senate race. But I do want to kind of look back real quick before we start looking ahead and ask you and get your take. How did you perform better than a lot of the Democrats here in Arizona? I mean, this was an election cycle where we saw Democrats take some losses from the state house on down, but you overperformed that. You even got more votes than Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee. So how was you able to accomplish that?
Well, look, it seems simple, but it was hard. We were campaigning for almost 23 months, and I used that time to really get throughout all of Arizona and talk to all of Arizona. It didn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or independent. And I think that was a big difference between me and other Democrats, is that I got to learn, people got to learn who I am and build a certain level of trust. And I think it's harder for other campaigns to do that.
Mm-hmm. And how important, you had basically the race to yourself almost for a year. I mean, you had Senator Kyrsten Sinema. She still hadn't decided whether she was running or not, but you were basically running all by yourself for the Democratic nomination. How important was that in the ultimate victory here?
Again, because it gave me time to really do what I needed to do, was to reach out and talk to Arizonans. And we used that time while Senator Sinema was still in and while the Republicans were trying to decide who was going to be their nominee, to reach out to Republicans and independents in Arizona. You got to remember, there are 300,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in Arizona. And so we used that opportunity to basically get out there and have these long and very important conversations that we had repeatedly to start building trust with people, so they knew that should Senator Sinema drop out, or should another option come that they didn't like, that we would be someone that they could work with.
Let's look forward a little bit. We're seeing reporting for President-elect Donald Trump intends to declare a national emergency and potentially use the military to assist in a mass deportation program. He campaigned on this. What is your reaction to that reporting coming out here recently?
Look, I don't think the American public wants to see our U.S. military kicking in doors and separating families. It's not what we have ever intended for the U.S. military to do. There's some scope, obviously, where we saw, for example, Biden, Obama, and Trump have used the National Guard to reinforce our borders, to help with Border Patrol. And I think that's where we should be looking at, using our civilian apparatus, Border Patrol, ICE, to go after some really bad people, some people that are in this country that should be deported, the people that have criminal records. But I don't believe that in this country that we want to separate families. I don't see that as something that people advocated for. When we heard mass deportation, a lot of people were talking about the people that abused the system, the sound system, for the last couple of years, and really caused the chaos that we see. So I think it's important that we have an understanding that replacing the chaos at the border with chaos in our communities, it's not good for our armed services, it's not good for our military members, it's not good for the respect we have for the military, and I'm not sure it would actually bring us more security. Using what we know, Border Patrol, ICE, working with them to track down some of these hardcore criminals, and also trying to stop more of this illegal crossing and abuse of the asylum system is the better way to go.
Yeah, but you know, the same voters that sent you to the Senate are the same voters here in Arizona that also reelected Donald Trump. Donald Trump clearly campaigned on this. This was the second bullet point on his Agenda 47. Doesn't that say something that this is what the voters want?
We needed a, yeah, well, I clearly campaigned also that we needed a saner approach to our border security and immigration. Where I said that we needed to have more ICE, we needed to have more ICE agents, more Border Patrol, more judges at the border so that we can actually adjudicate these fake asylum cases that are abusing the system, but at the same time making sure that we keep families together that should be together. We don't separate kids from families. And so it's my, maybe people read into it what they wanted to, but I don't believe that the core American families want us to separate some of these families, again, of people that don't have criminal records. If you have a criminal record, if you have a deportation order, that's a totally different story. You've already gone through due process, you should go. But for these families that, for example, that have parents maybe that are undocumented, but the kid is a U.S. citizen, do we really want to separate them, especially if they have no criminal record? What about the service member that does have family members that are undocumented? Guess what? Those, as someone that was in the Marine Corps, there's a lot of them out there. This idea that the United States public is for just blank slate mass deportation, I think is going to prove to be wrong. And there's ways for us to do this in an organized way that follows American values, that uses our civilian authority, Border Patrol, ICE, Customs, and our customs agents to do this.
And again, at this point right now, President-elect Trump hasn't taken office. This is a lot of rhetoric. We don't have any details on any proposals right now.
Correct. Yes.
But you'd brought up that, you brought up throughout this campaign your military history. If you were in the military and asked to assist in a program like this, is this a order that you would obey?
I'd have to actually listen and read the order and make sure that it is upholding the Constitution of the United States. I mean, that's what you do when you serve in the military, and as long as you are abiding by it, then it's not necessarily an illegal order. But again, we have to wait and see what this is. Now, what's important though is it's for what the leaders do, right? Because these are young men and women. They're 18, 19. A lot of them aren't going to question because it's not their place to question. Where it is for us as leaders to determine what is the best interest of this country and our national security. And anytime you use U.S. military force on U.S. citizens, you're potentially damaging the reputation of the U.S. military. So you have to be very careful about how you do it and why you do it. And is it actually necessary? Because I think, and my contention is that you could do this with civilian forces. You could do a lot of good enforcement, do the deportations that are necessary to keep this country safe and deter people from coming over without having to use our military force.
And I want to wrap up with this because I know you are short on time, that the president-elect has been making some appointments, people he intends to nominate for certain positions. There's been some controversial ones, and in particular, Congressman Matt Gaetz. When you take over in the Senate at the beginning of next year, Democrats will be in the minority. What, if anything, can you do you think, to try to hold up some of these nominations you disagree with, or anything else like that?
Look, I'm going to follow what the Constitution has set down senators are supposed to do, which is irrelevant whether you are a Democrat or Republican, which I'm going to speak to these nominees. I'm going to ask them questions to see if they're good for the country, if they're going to respect the Constitution of the United States, if they're going to look out for Arizonans. And of course, there are some controversial nominees. They're going to have to answer to a lot of hard questions. And I think, for the sake of the U.S. public, we have to do that. But outside of what my scope is, in terms of what the Constitution allows me to do, that's not much more than that. So I will either vote yes or no. Some of these nominees are very good. I'm fairly excited about Marco Rubio and a couple other nominees, but some of them are questionable, and they have to answer questions before I am willing to vote for them.
All right, thank you very much, Senator-elect Ruben Gallego. We really do appreciate you stopping by here on the show today.
Thank you.
And still ahead, President-elect Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to eliminate the Department of Education. So what would that mean to your child's school? We'll talk with an education advocate when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. President-elect Donald Trump has said he aims to dismantle the Department of Education. So what would that look like for students here in Arizona? Here to talk about that is Ruben Gallego, the executive director for Stand for Children Arizona. I want to thank you very much for being here. We should start off by also noting that on Friday there was a bill that was dropped in the Senate that would do exactly that, dismantle the Department of Education. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second, but I want to start with you. What does the department mean for Arizona and schools here and the students?
Yeah, well, the U.S. Department has 4 key functions. One of the most important is that it administers federal funds, particularly to students who are a little bit behind. For example, low-income students sometimes need extra support, or special needs student needs extra support. And so a lot of federal focus has been on helping every child succeed. It also makes sure that anti-discrimination and anti-racial laws are upheld. That's been a problem in schools historically. Has a really important function related to data collection across the U.S. so that we can analyze our competitiveness and we can look at our workforce and make sure we're going to have an educated workforce. And then it distributes important information back to the states about what works, what are some best practices, what can we all be doing better to make sure that every child is ready to engage in our workforce and help our economy.
And also, too, I understand there's a lot of money that flows out of that department to the states. I believe Arizona gets close to $1 billion from that for the schools used for those purposes.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it's not a large part of our budget overall. It tends to be about 15% of each state's budget. But that 15% makes a big difference to the kids and the schools that need it.
Okay, so this bill that's been introduced by a South Dakota senator to eliminate this Department of Education. What's your understanding of what that bill would do, and how do you think that affects Arizona right now?
Yeah, the bill would take the different departments and the activities of the U.S. Department, and it would distribute them between several other departments that already exist. For example, the Department of the Interior, the Treasury, the Labor Department, and shoot, I'm missing one.
It's another, yeah, it's one of the other departments. It would basically break up and send the money to
Health and Human Services.
There you go. So the various departments, and they would decide where the money would go. But if you did eliminate that department, how would that affect education here in Arizona? Would parents notice any changes, any differences?
You know, I think they would, because it would create a lot of inefficiencies in a system we want to have a mission about each child, right? And you can't take apart a child and say, which part of you is Department of Labor, which part of you is Treasury, which part of you is Department of Health and Human Services. We want to have a mission that makes sure that each child is prepared and educated to enter our workforce. So you can't do that very well by distributing the different pieces of support for a child amongst different bureaucracies. So while you think you might be making it more efficient, you're actually making it much less efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, you know, you worked for Republican governors in the past, or Jan Brewer. Republicans have always talked about eliminating bloated bureaucracies and stuff like that. But you're saying that this would not be more efficient if you were able to send this money to different departments to make these decisions. Why not? Why is that less efficient?
Exactly. Well, if you think about your personal finances, right? We generally have one bank account that we pay our grocery bill, our light bill, our car bill. So think about having 3 different bank accounts that you used, one for your groceries, one for your electricity, one for your car payment. That's not very efficient. It's 3 completely different systems, completely different accounting, and how are you thinking about, like, how do I save money as a whole? How do I, right? How do I combine my resources to have lower interest payments? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to spread it out across these different departments.
Yeah, and I just want to wrap up with this question too. I mean, you're a student advocate, your group advocates for these kinds of things. At this point, we don't know how successful any attempts would be in Washington to eliminate that department. Obviously, Donald Trump had campaigned on it. We're seeing legislations to do exactly that. When you see this now, everything shaping up, what are groups like yours doing to prepare for any eventual elimination of this department?
Well, I think the first step is to advocate against the elimination of the department. So I think a lot of folks are going to be keeping an eye on the it really is an act of Congress. It's not really about President Trump. So we'll keep an eye on the bill. I'm sure lots of groups will be getting involved and hope the bill doesn't pass. If it does pass, then it becomes helping the states and helping families and helping schools navigate a more just a trickier bureaucracy.
All right, I want to thank you very much. That's Rebecca Gao, with Executive Director for Stand for Children Arizona. And coming up next, I'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including a long line of politicians rumored to challenge Governor Katie Hobbs in the 2026 election. That's next on Politics Unplugged. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. We're 2 years out from the next election for governor, but already challengers to Katie Hobbs are lining up on both sides of the aisle. And here to talk about that and the rest of this week's political headlines, consultant Don Penich and Republican Marcus Dell'Artino. Thank you guys for joining us here. And let's start with the governor. And start with you here. Is the governor actually vulnerable at this time? Because it certainly appears a lot of people think she is.
No. We have an incumbent governor who has been working with split government. She has $3 million in the bank. She is a proven, effective fundraiser, and there are no grounds at which to come at her from, inside her own party. So I think that no one will be surprised to know that politicians like to see their name in print, like to have people talking about them, but I think that that is the extent of the reality here.
Politicians looking for publicity and attention?
I know, it's shocking.
That is a shocker. That is a shocker. But Marcus, you may have a different take on this. Is the incumbent governor, is she vulnerable at this point, be it in a primary or even a general election?
I was going to say, from a primary standpoint, I think Democrats are finally going to figure out what Republicans are trying to figure out, which is you are much stronger in not having a primary challenge going into that general election. So I'm sure there will be an about face with a few in the Democrat Party. And she'll probably be unchallenged in the primary. In the general election, I mean, look, the voter registration figures are continuing to grow in the Republicans' favor. And so I think that's the Democrats' #1 challenge, is to close that gap as soon as possible. Because we saw the evidence here in this last election that the Democrats didn't turn out and exacerbated sort of some of those wins in the legislature and other seats.
And, Marcus seems pretty confident that Democrats will figure out that they should run a clear primary for the governor. But Secretary of State Adrian Fontes is making some headlines, getting some of that attention that politicians like to get by saying he's been approached. People have asked him to run for governor, and he's mulling it over at this time. Is this a serious threat for Katie Hobbs, and how does this change moving forward how she navigates the legislative session?
No, and I think that Secretary Fontes has even walked that back himself. I don't know who these people approaching him have been. I have not personally heard this. What I have heard is that Democrats have 3 statewide seats for the first time in decades, are very invested in keeping those seats and using the power of the incumbency across all 3 of them, including Secretary Fontes' current position. So no, I don't think that a primary challenge is a real thing. And I think that in terms of working with this legislature, we've been here before. This is essentially the same legislature she had before in terms of numbers. And just like she got some work done on canceling medical debt, reproductive rights, housing, I think that she will try to get the wins that this legislature will allow her to have. And it behooves everyone to get something done, because everyone is up again in 2026.
Yeah, and one of those Democratic statewide office holders, obviously Attorney General Chris Mays, and she said that she intends on running for re-election to her current job, and she's perfectly happy as of right now where she's at. But let's look at the Republican side here. Karen Taylor Robson looks like she's all but in already. What should she be doing right now to set herself up for a successful run at the governor's office? Because it looks like she's going to have to clear the primary out a little bit for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think Republicans are working on that, right? They want one candidate going into that general election. Get rid of that. The primary is just ugly. It causes a lot of problems. It wastes a lot of money. So I think she's got a very good shot at clearing the field going into that general election, and we'll have a one-on-one with Katie Hobbs versus Karen Robson Taylor. Yeah,
and she'll be able to definitely self-fund on some of that kind of stuff. But let me ask you, I know the Democrat asking about the former Republican statewide challenger in the past 2 races, Kerry Lake. I mean, could she even conceivably make another run for governor at this point? And be taken serious at this point as a two-time loser statewide?
I mean, I couldn't imagine it. And at least in this moment, if you go back and watch her non-concession speech from a couple weeks ago, it didn't sound like the kind of speech that's just getting ready to pivot right into a new campaign.
And Marcus, what do you think? I mean, you know, what are Republicans telling you? Could Kerry Lake be taken seriously in another primary? Do you think primary voters are ready to move on and start looking for someone else?
Honestly, the only person we're talking about is Karen Robeson-Taylor, and so no other names have come
we'll
up.
talk about some more. There's some other names that we could talk about, Marcus.
Whether it's Kerry Lake or other people, but I think Republicans seem to be mostly focused on Karen running for governor.
Okay, but some of the other names that are out there, we're hearing, you know, people like Juan Ciscomani, maybe Charlie Kirk are thinking of taking a look at this. Could this be open, the Republican primary, to someone who's, you know, maybe not a household name right now?
It could. It absolutely could. But I think that Republicans are solely focused on clearing the field. We've had enough experience knowing that primaries are not helpful for our candidate going into a general election. I think that we've had enough time to learn our lessons, and I think we're going to unite against a candidate early on and clear that primary.
Yeah, and does someone like a Karen Taylor Robeson provide a potential real challenge to Katie Hobbs? You mentioned Katie Hobbs has $3 million in the bank. Karen Taylor Robeson has a lot of money in the bank. We know that she spent somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere upwards of like $20 million a couple of years ago in her unsuccessful primary bid for the Republican nomination. This could be a real challenge for Hobbs just on the money side, right?
No, I think that would be she would put up a formidable challenge. It would be a hard-fought race. It will probably be a close result. I think one thing not to discount is the influence that Washington will have at the state level. We will have had 2 years of a Trump administration again. We will have all of the constant headlines that we know his type of leadership produces. And Arizonans, just like we love to split a ballot, we also love to have a check and balance between the federal government and what we're doing here in the state. And so I don't want to forget that will be a real factor. People will be looking at Washington and saying, well, okay, here in state, we want some consistency. We want to check on what's going on Capitol Hill, and that will only help Governor Hobbs.
Yeah, and Don brings up a great point. The politics could all change here over the next 2 years. Give me the best case, worst case scenario for Republicans in 2026 regaining the governorship.
Well, I think conventional wisdom would say it's an off year. You got 2 years of Trump, and so historically the counterbalance comes and it'll be a good year for Democrats. My issue here at the end of the day is that the voter registration figures are what the voter registration figures are, and you're not going to, until the Democrats catch up on that almost 7%. You know, you've got to look at Republicans pretty seriously going into that election, that they've got a good shot.
All right, and we're going to have to wrap up this part right here. But before we go, we want to take a moment to remember a man who served Arizona under 7 different governors. Alberto Gutierrez spent more than 20 years as director for the governor's office of highway safety. He was sometimes called the godfather of the GOP in Arizona. He passed away at his home earlier this month. Alberto Gutierrez was respected by all of us who cover politics in this state and will be deeply missed. And that is all the time we have. Be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged.